The blue light hummed louder than her heartbeat. Mila stared at the orb, frozen, the world around her collapsing into irrelevance. It hovered 3 feet above the field's damp grass, its surface a perfect, silvery sheen unmarred by scratches or reflections. A faint glow pulsed from its core, synchronizing with her rapid breaths. This wasn't a dream, and it wasn't an illusion. The thing was real, and it had landed right behind her grandmother's farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. Subscribe now to explore the unknown. Like and comment if you've ever questioned what's out there. Her phone lay forgotten in her hand, the recording icon blinking red, capturing every second of the impossible object. Moments earlier, the sky had erupted in streaks of emerald and crimson, unlike any aurora she'd seen in the northern woods of Minnesota. Then came the lights, 4 brilliant orbs splitting from the sky and plummeting to earth in silence. By the time Mila ran outside, the others were gone, their impact hidden beyond the horizon, but this one remained. It seemed to notice her, or maybe it was her imagination. The orb pulsed once more, sending a faint ripple through the air, making the hairs on her arms stand up. "What do you want?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of awe and fear. It didn't respond, but as she took a cautious step closer, the hum deepened, almost as if warning her. Behind her, the farmhouse door slammed. "Mila," her grandmother's voice broke the trance. "Get back in here. It's not safe." She hesitated, her instincts battling with her curiosity. The orb felt alive somehow, and if it was, it held answers she desperately wanted. For as long as she could remember, Mila had been obsessed with the stars. Her father, a NASA engineer lost to a freak shuttle accident when she was 7, had filled her head with stories of alien civilizations and humanity's place in the cosmos. She dreamed of finding proof, of continuing his legacy. Now, that proof floated less than 10 feet away. But it wasn't just her childhood dreams that held her rooted to the spot. It was the thought of what this thing might mean for everyone. Was it a gift, a warning, or something far worse? Her grandmother appeared in the doorway, shotgun in hand. "Mila," I said, "get in the house." The orb flared bright enough to illuminate the entire yard, and in that flash, Mila caught something that froze her blood. Symbols. They danced across its surface like liquid fire, complex, intricate shapes that shifted too fast to comprehend. Then, without a sound, it shot upward into the sky, leaving only scorched grass and an overwhelming silence. Mila's breath came in ragged gasps as she turned to her grandmother, who stood motionless, staring at the empty sky. The older woman's face was pale, her fingers white knuckled around the shotgun. "What did it say?" her grandmother asked. "It didn't," Mila faltered. "It didn't say anything." Her grandmother shook her head, muttering something under her breath, as she pulled Mila inside and bolted the door. For the first time, Mila saw fear in her eyes. Genuine, bone-deep fear. That night, the news exploded with reports of the lights. People from across the globe uploaded shaky videos of orbs descending from the heavens. New York, Tokyo, Cairo, Sydney, Moscow. No one knew what they were or what they wanted, but the symbols Mila had seen were a common thread in every sighting. As scientists scrambled for answers and governments scrambled for control, Mila stayed glued to her laptop, analyzing every frame of her footage. The symbols were hauntingly familiar, though she couldn't place where she'd seen them before. Her grandmother's cryptic remarks gnawed at her too. Finally, after hours of silence, Mila spoke up. "You knew, didn't you?" Her grandmother didn't meet her gaze. Instead, she poured herself a whiskey, her hands trembling. "You've always been so much like your father. Stubborn, curious. What does that mean?" The old woman sighed deeply, sinking into her chair by the fireplace. "I hoped it wouldn't happen in your lifetime." "What wouldn't happen?" Mila pressed. Her grandmother sipped her drink, staring into the flames. "They're not just visitors. They're scouts. And if we're not careful, they'll bring the end of everything we know." The weight of her words hung heavy in the room, and Mila's mind raced with possibilities. Scouts for what? An invasion? Or something worse? There was no way she could stop now. The orbs had come for a reason, and whatever that reason was, it had to be uncovered before it was too late. The first thing Mila did the next morning was pack her gear: laptop, camera, notepad, and a flashlight that had survived countless camping trips with her dad. Her grandmother's cryptic warning replayed in her mind, but instead of deterring her, it fueled her determination. She had to understand what the orbs were, what the symbols meant, and why they'd arrived now. The internet was a whirlwind of theories. Alien diplomats, experimental weapons, interdimensional travelers. The media had plastered images and videos of the orbs across every channel, but no one had answers. Mila couldn't sit idly by and wait for someone else to figure it out. She knew she had to lead: the symbols. She opened her laptop and brought up the clearest frame from her video. The symbols glowed faintly on the orb's surface, moving too fast for the eye to follow, but with video editing software, she managed to isolate individual frames. The symbols reminded her of something, but what? They had an almost mathematical elegance, a symmetry that hinted at a purpose she couldn't yet decipher. Then it hit her: her dad's old notebooks. Mila raced up to the attic, where her father's belongings had been stored after his death. Dust motes swirled in the sunlight streaming through the single attic window as she rummaged through the boxes labeled James Callahan, NASA, personal effects. She found them at the bottom of a box filled with faded photos and yellowing blueprints, leather-bound notebooks, each filled with his precise, slanted handwriting. Her heart ached as she flipped through them, memories of late-night stargazing and his patient explanations flooding back. And then on the second-to-last page of the final notebook, she saw it, a symbol identical to one from the orb. Her hands trembled as she traced the shape with her finger. Beneath it, her dad had scrawled one word: Cosmo Code. She had no idea what it meant, but it felt significant. Her dad's notes hinted at a theory he'd been developing, a universal language that could bridge the gap between alien civilizations. The symbols, he believed, were more than just communication. They were the key to unlocking advanced technology, even understanding the nature of the universe itself. Mila felt a surge of hope, but it was quickly tempered by her grandmother's voice echoing in her mind. They're scouts. If the orbs were trying to communicate, why was her grandmother so afraid? Mila decided she needed more context, more information. Her father's notebooks weren't enough. That night, she took her camera and flashlight and headed back to the field where the orb had landed. The patch of scorched grass still radiated faint warmth, and the air smelled of ozone. Kneeling in the center, Mila felt the hum of energy beneath her fingertips, as if the ground itself remembered the orb's presence. Her flashlight caught something, a faint shimmer in the soil. Digging carefully with her hands, she unearthed a fragment of metal no larger than a coin. It was smooth and cold, etched with tiny, intricate symbols similar to the ones she'd seen on the orb. Her pulse quickened. This was a clue, a piece of the puzzle. Suddenly, her phone buzzed in her pocket, shattering the silence. She jumped, fumbling to answer it. Mila. Her grandmother's voice was sharp, panicked. Get back to the house. Now. Why? What's wrong? They're coming back. Before Mila could respond, the line went dead. She looked up, her eyes scanning the horizon. At first, she saw nothing but stars. Then, faintly, she noticed movement, specks of light growing brighter, larger, closer. The orbs. This time, there were 3 of them, descending silently like falling stars. Mila's heart pounded as she stuffed the metal fragment into her pocket and grabbed her camera. She needed to record this. She needed proof. The orbs hovered in a triangular formation above the field. Their light, so intense it cast shadows in every direction. Mila crouched low, trying to steady her camera. One of the orbs descended further, stopping just a few feet above the ground. It pulsed with a rhythm she recognized, slow, deliberate, almost like breathing. Then the symbols appeared again, swirling across its surface. But this time, they didn't stay random. They began to align, forming patterns, sequences. Mila realized with a jolt that the orb wasn't just displaying the symbols. It was directing them at her. Her father's notes flashed through her mind. Cosmo code. Could it be trying to communicate? Tentatively, she spoke. I don't understand. Can you show me? The orb's glow intensified, and suddenly, the world around her transformed. She was no longer in the field, but standing in an endless void filled with stars. Floating in front of her was a vast, intricate machine, its design unlike anything she'd ever seen. It seemed to pulse with life, its components shifting and reconfiguring endlessly. Mila felt a presence, not physical, but undeniable. The machine wasn't just a construct. It was alive, and it was aware of her. A single thought entered her mind, clear and unmistakable. Help us. Before she could respond, the vision ended, and she was back in the field, the orb hovering silently before her. It pulsed one final time and shot into the sky, disappearing into the stars. Mila collapsed to her knees, her mind racing. Whatever these things were, they weren't just scouts. They were seeking something, someone, and for reasons she couldn't yet fathom, they'd chosen her. Mila barely remembered the walk back to the house. Her mind churned with questions, replaying the events in the field over and over again. Help us. The message was crystal clear, but its meaning wasn't. Who were they? Why did they need her help? When she stepped through the door, her grandmother was waiting in the living room, shotgun resting on her lap. The television was on, muted, flashing images of scientists in hazmat suits, government officials at podiums, and frantic crowds protesting in the streets. The world was spiraling into chaos, and Mila had a sinking feeling. It was only the beginning. Where were you? Her grandmother snapped, her face pale and drawn. I needed to see them again, Mila said, her voice firm despite the fear gripping her chest. And they came back. Her grandmother's eyes widened. You saw them? Mila nodded, pulling the metal fragment from her pocket and holding it out. And this was left behind. It has the same symbols as the orbs. Her grandmother recoiled at the sight of it. Get that thing out of this house. Why are you so afraid of them? Mila demanded, her frustration boiling over. They're not here to hurt us. They're trying to communicate. They asked for help. Her grandmother's expression darkened. You don't know what you're dealing with. Then tell me. Mila shouted, her voice breaking. You clearly know more than you're letting on. What aren't you telling me? The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that only comes with long-buried secrets. Finally, her grandmother sighed and set the shotgun aside. Sit down, she said. Mila obeyed, her heart pounding as she sat across from the woman who had always been a fortress of strength and certainty. When I was your age, her grandmother began, something like this happened before. It was during the Cold War, 1957, the year the Soviets launched Sputnik. But there was another launch, one no one ever talked about. An object entered Earth's atmosphere, much like these orbs. It landed outside of town, near an old mining site. I was there. I saw it. Mila leaned forward, hanging on her every word. The government swooped in fast, military trucks, scientists in white coats, the whole 9 yards. They told us to keep our mouths shut, that it was some kind of classified experiment. But I knew better. That thing wasn't man-made. Her grandmother's voice grew quieter, and neither was the thing inside it. Inside, Mila whispered. Her grandmother nodded. It wasn't an orb back then, more like a capsule. And when it opened, she trailed off, her eyes distant. There was something alive in there, humanoid but not human. It didn't speak, not in words anyway, but we could feel it, a presence. It showed us things, images, feelings. It wanted to warn us about something, but the military didn't care. They treated it like a threat, and when it resisted, she swallowed hard. They destroyed it. Mila felt a cold chill run down her spine. And the warning, her grandmother's gaze met hers. sharp and unflinching. It said others would come, that they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. What do they want? That's the question, isn't it? Her grandmother said bitterly. Back then, we thought it was technology, secrets they wanted to steal. But maybe it's something bigger. Maybe it's us. Mila shook her head. No. The orb I saw, what it showed me, it wasn't hostile. It was desperate. They're not here to conquer us. They're here because they need help. Help with what? I don't know, Mila admitted, but I intend to find out. Her grandmother's face hardened. Don't go chasing ghosts, Mila. You'll end up like your father. The word stung, but Mila refused to back down. She stood, pocketing the metal fragment. If these things are as dangerous as you say, then ignoring them isn't an option. If I can figure out what they want, why they're here, maybe I can stop whatever's coming. Her grandmother didn't respond, just watched as Mila headed for the door. Mila spent the next few days poring over her father's notebooks, cross-referencing his theories with the footage and photos circulating online. She also sent a high-resolution scan of the metal fragment to a friend of hers, Alex, a tech-savvy astrophysics grad student at MIT who owed her a favor. When Alex called back 2 days later, his voice was electric with excitement. Mila, this thing you sent me, do you know what you're holding? Not exactly, she admitted. It's an alloy, but not one we've ever seen on Earth. Its molecular structure is, well, it shouldn't exist. It's self-organizing, like it's alive. And those symbols, they're not just markings. They're part of its programming. This isn't just a piece of debris. It's a computational device. A really advanced one. Mila's pulse quickened. Can you figure out what it's for? Maybe, Alex said, but it's going to take time. And Mila, be careful. If this thing is as advanced as it seems, someone else will want it. Someone who won't ask nicely. The warning hung in the air long after the call ended. Mila knew Alex was right, but she also knew she couldn't stop now. The orbs had chosen her for a reason, and she wasn't going to let fear hold her back. As night fell, she prepared for her next move. Wherever this path led, answers, danger, or something unimaginable, she was ready to follow it. Mila's obsession deepened in the following days. She barely slept, alternating between deciphering her father's notebooks, scouring conspiracy forums, and revisiting her footage of the orbs. Her laptop screen was littered with open tabs. Images of the orbs, astrophysics papers, obscure articles on cryptic alien encounters, and decoded fragments of the symbols. The symbols haunted her. They seemed alive, shifting in her mind's eye even when she wasn't looking at them. Her father's notes offered some insight into their structure, comparing them to a self-referential mathematical language. But they were incomplete. She needed more data, more symbols, more context. Her break came unexpectedly when Alex called again. His voice, usually calm and methodical, was edged with urgency. Mila, we've got a problem. What is it? That fragment you sent me, it's broadcasting. Mila's stomach dropped. Broadcasting what? I don't know. It's emitting some kind of signal in bursts. At first, I thought it was random, but the intervals are consistent, like a beacon. If I can pick it up, so can anyone else. You need to be careful. Mila clutched the fragment, her thoughts racing. Was the signal a call for help or a warning? Later that night, as she pored over her notes, a low rumble shook the house. At first, she thought it was a passing truck, but then the noise grew louder, resonating with an unnatural frequency that made her bones vibrate. She rushed outside and froze. 3 orbs hovered in the distance, their lights flickering erratically. Unlike before, they weren't silent. A strange, mechanical whine emanated from them, a sound that felt like it was tunneling directly into her brain. Her grandmother stormed out behind her, shotgun in hand. Mila, get back inside. No, Mila said, her voice trembling but resolute. I need to know what they want. Mila, listen to me. Her grandmother grabbed her arm. This isn't curiosity anymore. This is survival. Before Mila could respond, one of the orbs broke formation and began descending toward the field. Its surface rippled with light, the symbols appearing and disappearing faster than ever. "I have to go," Mila said, pulling free. Her grandmother's voice was lost in the growing hum as Mila sprinted toward the orb. She stopped just short of where it hovered, the grass beneath it wilting as if drained of life. The symbols slowed, forming sequences that Mila recognized from her father's notes. Tentatively, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the fragment. The orb's light brightened immediately, bathing her in an ethereal glow. A jolt of energy surged through her body, and suddenly, she wasn't in the field anymore. She stood in a vast, dimly lit chamber, its walls pulsating with a faint, organic glow. Floating before her was the same machine she'd seen in her vision, its endless components shifting and reconfiguring with a fluidity that defied logic. This time, the presence was stronger, more defined. It wasn't just observing her, it was communicating. The fragment. "Place it." Mila hesitated, clutching the fragment tightly. "What are you? What do you want?" "The fragment. Place it." The thought repeated, more insistent. Mila stepped forward, drawn to the machine despite her fear. A small panel opened on its surface, revealing a slot that perfectly matched the fragment in her hand. "What happens if I do this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Stabilization. Continuity. The words meant nothing to her, but the urgency in the presence was palpable. Taking a deep breath, she inserted the fragment. The effect was immediate. The machine flared to life, its glow intensifying as the walls around her dissolved into a star-filled void. Mila felt herself being pulled through space, her mind bombarded with images and sensations. She saw worlds torn apart by catastrophic events, planets collapsing, civilizations erased. She felt the desperation of countless beings, their lives extinguished in an instant, and then she saw Earth. The orbs weren't scouts or invaders. They were refugees, remnants of a civilization destroyed by something vast and unstoppable. Their message was clear: Earth was next. The vision ended as abruptly as it had begun, and Mila found herself back in the field, the orb retreating into the sky. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the scorched grass, gasping for air. Her grandmother was at her side moments later, her face pale with worry. "What happened?" "They're not here to hurt us," Mila whispered. "They're running from something. And whatever it is, it's coming here." Her grandmother's face hardened. "Then we need to prepare." Mila shook her head. "You don't understand. We can't fight it. The only way to survive is to work with them, to help them. Help them how?" "I don't know yet," Mila admitted, her voice breaking. "But I think I know where to start." She pulled out her phone and dialed Alex. "I need you to meet me," she said when he picked up. "Bring everything you've got on that fragment. And Alex, don't tell anyone. Not yet." As she hung up, she looked back at the sky, where the orbs had disappeared. Whatever was coming, it was bigger than anything she'd ever imagined. And if she failed to act, it wouldn't just be the orbs that were destroyed, it would be everything. Mila's heart raced as she sat in the back booth of an all-night diner on the edge of town, nervously glancing at the door every few seconds. The fragment lay on the table before her, wrapped in an old cloth. She had barely slept since the vision in the field, the weight of what she'd seen pressing down on her like a physical force. The bell above the door jingled, and Alex walked in, clutching a laptop bag and looking as frazzled as Mila felt. He spotted her and hurried over, his expression a mix of excitement and worry. "I got your message," he said, sliding into the booth. "What the hell is going on, Mila?" "You sounded." He stopped mid-sentence when she unwrapped the fragment. "Still think it's just an alloy?" she asked, her tone edged with irony. Alex reached for it but hesitated, his hand hovering inches above the object. "I ran more tests after our last call," he said, his voice low. "This thing isn't just advanced. It's rewriting physics as we know it. The signal it's emitting, Mila, it's not just broadcasting. It's creating something. I don't know what, but the pattern suggests some kind of self-replicating system. That makes sense, Mila said. She quickly explained her encounter with the orb, the vision, and the message she had received. Alex listened, his skepticism visibly eroding with every word. You're saying these things are refugees? From some kind of galactic apocalypse, he asked when she finished. That's exactly what I'm saying, Mila replied. And whatever destroyed their world is heading for ours. Alex leaned back, rubbing his temples. This is insane, he muttered. Maybe, Mila said, but it's happening. And if we don't figure out what to do, we're screwed. Alex nodded slowly, then opened his laptop. All right, he said. Let's start with the signal. If the fragment is trying to create something, maybe we can figure out what it's building. And why. As Alex worked, Mila's thoughts drifted back to her vision. The images had been so vivid, so real. She could still feel the fear and desperation of the beings who had sent the orbs. But there was something else, too, something she hadn't told Alex. Buried within the chaos of the vision had been a single, fleeting image, a massive, shadowy structure floating in the void, its edges bristling with jagged spires. It had felt alive, malevolent, and ancient beyond comprehension. She didn't know what it was, but she was certain it was connected to whatever had destroyed the orb's world. Hours passed as Alex sifted through data, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The diner's other patrons came and went, paying little attention to the two exhausted young people huddled over a laptop and a strange, glowing object. Finally, Alex leaned back with a triumphant smile. Got it, he said. What is it? Mila asked, leaning forward eagerly. The signal isn't just a beacon, Alex explained. It's a blueprint, a set of instructions encoded in the symbols. And get this, it's designed to interface with other fragments. Mila frowned. Other fragments? Alex nodded. This piece isn't complete. It's part of a larger system, like a puzzle piece. If we can find the other pieces and assemble them, we might be able to figure out what the orbs are trying to build. Mila's heart sank. But how are we supposed to find them? We don't even know where to start. Alex hesitated, then pulled up a satellite map on his laptop. Actually, he said, we might have a lead. I ran a scan for similar energy signatures, and there's a cluster of them about 50 miles north of here, near the old quarry. Mila stared at the map, her mind racing. That's where we're going, she said. Wait a second, Alex protested. We don't know what's out there. It could be dangerous. It's already dangerous, Mila shot back. Every second we waste is one less second we have to stop whatever's coming. Are you in or not? Alex sighed but nodded. Fine, he said, but we're taking precautions. If this is as big as you say it is, we can't afford to mess up. The two of them left the diner an hour later, the fragment carefully packed in a reinforced case. They drove north in silence, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. When they arrived at the quarry, the first thing they noticed was the eerie stillness. The air was heavy, the usual sounds of wildlife conspicuously absent. Mila shivered as they made their way down the gravel path, the beam of her flashlight cutting through the darkness. Over here, Alex said, pointing to a faint glow emanating from a fissure in the rock. They approached cautiously, their footsteps crunching on the loose gravel. As they drew closer, the glow intensified, revealing a cluster of crystalline fragments embedded in the rock. The symbols on their surfaces pulsed faintly, as if alive. Mila reached out to touch one, but Alex grabbed her wrist. Wait, he said. We don't know what will happen. We don't have a choice, Mila replied, pulling free. She placed her hand on the nearest fragment, and a surge of energy shot through her. The world around her dissolved into darkness, and she found herself face to face with the machine again. You are the key, the presence said, its voice echoing in her mind. Complete the device, or all will be lost. When the vision ended, Mila was back in the quarry, her hand still on the fragment. She turned to Alex, her voice steady despite the terror she felt. We have to take these with us, she said. What if we can't control them? Alex asked. We don't have a choice, Mila said. The machine needs them. And if we fail, she trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Alex nodded grimly, and together, they began extracting the fragments from the rock. The future of their world, and possibly others, depended on what they did next. Mila and Alex returned to her grandmother's house just before dawn, the sky streaked with the faint light of the coming day. The fragments from the quarry sat in a reinforced crate in the back of Alex's car, their faint glow seeping through the gaps. Inside, her grandmother was waiting, her arms crossed and her expression stern. What in the world have you two been up to? She asked, her tone sharp with worry. We found something, Mila said, stepping past her and into the living room. She placed the crate on the coffee table, opening it to reveal the crystalline fragments. Her grandmother's eyes widened, but her voice remained steady. And what exactly am I looking at? Pieces of something bigger, Mila said, pulling out the first fragment she had retrieved. Something the orbs need us to complete. Alex chimed in, setting up his laptop on the table. We believe these fragments are part of a device, a system. Mila thinks it's the key to stopping whatever destroyed their world. Her grandmother sat down slowly, her gaze fixed on the fragments. And what makes you think this device can help us? For all we know, you're building the very thing that's going to destroy us. I don't think so, Mila said, though her voice carried a flicker of doubt. The orbs aren't a threat. They're running from something, a predator. I saw it in the vision, Grandma. And if we don't act now, Earth will be next. Her grandmother studied her for a long moment before nodding. All right, she said, but you're not doing this alone. Whatever happens, we face it together, with her grandmother's reluctant blessing. Mila and Alex began the arduous task of analyzing the fragments. They laid them out on the table, their glowing symbols casting strange shadows on the walls. Alex hooked up sensors and scanners, running data through his laptop, while Mila consulted her father's notes, looking for any clues that might help them piece the fragments together. Hours turned into days as they worked, the outside world fading into the background. Mila barely ate, her focus entirely consumed by the symbols and the intricate patterns they formed. She began to notice connections between the fragments, subtle alignments that suggested how they might fit together. One night, as Alex was dozing off on the couch, Mila had a breakthrough. She arranged 3 of the fragments into a triangular formation, and the symbols on their surfaces flared to life, connecting in a dazzling web of light. Alex, she shouted, jolting him awake. He scrambled to his feet, blinking at the glowing fragments. You did it, he said, his voice filled with awe. Not yet, Mila replied. This is just the beginning. There's still more to figure out. Over the next few days, they made slow but steady progress. Each time they added a fragment to the growing structure, the symbols would shift and realign, revealing new patterns and sequences. The device was beginning to take shape, its purpose still a mystery, but its power undeniable. Then, one evening, as they connected the final fragment from the quarry, the entire device activated. A column of light shot upward, piercing through the ceiling and into the sky. Mila and Alex stumbled back, shielding their eyes as the device emitted a low, resonant hum. The column of light pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat, and Mila felt a familiar presence pressing against her mind. The key is incomplete, the voice said. Seek the others. Mila frowned. Others? You mean there are more fragments? They are scattered. Time is short. The predator approaches. Before Mila could ask more, the light faded and the room fell silent. Alex broke the silence. Did it just say there are more fragments? Mila nodded. And we need to find them. Fast. Her grandmother stepped forward, her face pale but determined. How do we even begin to look? This isn't exactly something you can Google. Mila thought for a moment, then remembered the strange energy signature Alex had detected at the quarry. We use the same method we used to find these, she said. We scan for the energy signature and follow it. Alex hesitated. That might take time we don't have, he said. And there's another problem. If the fragments are active, they could be broadcasting their location. We might not be the only ones looking for them. Mila's stomach twisted at the thought. Then we move quickly, she said. We split up if we have to. We can't let anyone else get to them first. Her grandmother placed a hand on her shoulder. You're taking a big risk, Mila. But if this is what it takes to save our world, we'll do it. The three of them set to work, devising a plan to locate and retrieve the remaining fragments. Mila and Alex would take the lead, using Alex's equipment to track the energy signatures, while her grandmother stayed behind to monitor their progress and provide support. As they prepared to leave, Mila couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The predator was coming, and every second brought it closer. But she also felt a spark of hope. The device wasn't complete yet, but it was a start. And as long as they kept moving, kept fighting, they still had a chance to save everything they loved. The days blurred together as Mila, Alex, and her grandmother relentlessly pursued the remaining fragments. They moved swiftly, crossing the country in search of the elusive pieces that would complete the device. Every time they found one, the energy signature would intensify, a clear signal that they were getting closer to something important. But the farther they traveled, the more they sensed something else, something watching them. The first sign came in the form of a strange, unmarked black van tailing them from a distance as they drove through the Nevada desert. Mila spotted it first, just as they passed through a desolate stretch of highway. She'd been glancing in the rearview mirror when she noticed the black vehicle's headlights far too close, yet it was keeping a careful distance. "Alex, I think we're being followed," she said, her voice tight. He glanced in the mirror, then sped up, testing the van's response. It followed. "This is bad," Alex muttered. "We need to lose them." Mila's heart pounded. She knew they couldn't afford to let anyone get too close, especially with the fragments so near completion. "We can't outrun them on this road," she said. "Take the next exit." "I have an idea." He nodded, veering off onto a small dirt road that led into the desert. The van followed. They sped across the rugged terrain, the wheels of the car kicking up dust as the van remained hot on their heels. "What's the plan?" Alex asked, his voice tense. Mila didn't answer immediately. She was scanning the landscape, searching for something, anything that could help them shake off their pursuers. That's when she saw it. A massive rock formation ahead, towering high above the desert floor. "Turn left," she shouted. Alex slammed the wheel to the left, and they veered off the dirt road, heading directly toward the rocky outcrop. The van followed without hesitation. "Hold on," Alex warned, gunning the engine as they approached the base of the formation. They shot into a narrow ravine between two enormous boulders, the car's tires skimming the edge of the cliff. Mila felt her stomach lurch as they descended deeper into the canyon, the rocks rising steeply on both sides. The van was right behind them, but the terrain was too treacherous for it to follow easily. "We need to lose them now," Mila muttered under her breath. Ahead, the ravine twisted sharply. Mila could hear the van's engine straining to keep up, but it was starting to slow down. Mila gripped the armrest tightly as Alex floored the accelerator, taking the corner at breakneck speed. The van hesitated, the driver unsure whether to risk the sharp turn. They had a few precious seconds. "Now's our chance," Mila said. "Get ready." Alex swerved, taking the next sharp turn into a narrow offshoot of the canyon. They shot down the path at full speed, praying it would lead somewhere safe. The van's headlights flickered behind them, but Mila could hear it struggling to make the turn, losing ground. With a final desperate push, they shot out of the canyon and back onto a more open trail, leaving the van far behind. "That was too close," Alex said, his voice shaky but relieved. Mila exhaled deeply, her hands still gripping the edge of her seat. "We can't keep running like this," she said. "Someone knows what we're doing, and they're getting closer." Alex nodded, but his face was drawn. We're not the only ones looking for the fragments. Someone's trying to stop us, and if they're willing to follow us across the desert, they must know what the stakes are. Her grandmother, who had been silent throughout the chase, spoke up. Then it's time to speed things up. We can't afford to be cautious anymore. If we don't finish what we've started, we'll all be dead long before we can stop whatever's coming. Mila looked at her grandmother, her resolve hardening. She was right. They couldn't keep running. They had to finish the device. But even as they continued their search for the final fragments, Mila couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was waiting for them at the end of this journey. A week later, after a series of false leads, they arrived at an isolated facility in the Rocky Mountains, a research station long abandoned after a fire had ravaged it years ago. It was here that they finally found the last piece. The fragment had been hidden in the wreckage of the building's collapsed roof, buried under piles of charred debris. As they approached the ruin, Mila's heart quickened. She felt the presence again, the one that had warned her of the predator. It was closer now, its energy palpable, a dark force pressing against her. "We're almost there," Alex said, brushing dust from a piece of the wreckage. He reached down and pulled out the final fragment, his hands trembling slightly. Mila took the fragment from him, feeling its energy hum beneath her fingers. The device was now complete. As they stood there in the shadows of the wreckage, a heavy silence fell over them. The air felt thick with tension, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Then, without warning, the ground beneath their feet began to shake. The energy from the completed device pulsed violently, sending shockwaves through the surrounding area. The predator had arrived. Mila stumbled back, her eyes wide as a massive shadow appeared on the horizon. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, an enormous, monolithic ship that seemed to blot out the sky. Its surface rippled like liquid metal, and its sheer size was incomprehensible. That's the thing from my vision," Mila whispered, her voice barely audible. "The predator," Alex said, his face pale with fear. "It's here." Her grandmother's voice broke through the shock. "We have no choice. We have to activate the device. Now." Mila nodded, her mind spinning. They had completed the device. It was their only hope. But would it be enough to stop the nightmare that was descending upon them? With trembling hands, Mila placed a final fragment into the center of the device, activating it. The entire machine surged to life, sending out a brilliant pulse of light that streaked toward the sky, racing toward the approaching ship. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the ship responded. A massive beam of energy shot down from the predator's ship, and Mila held her breath, waiting for the inevitable. The beam collided with the light from the device, creating a stunning explosion of force that sent shockwaves through the ground. For a moment, everything went black. When the light faded, the predator's ship was gone. The air was still. The ground had stopped shaking. Mila looked around, her chest tight with fear and exhaustion. Did we stop it?" Alex shook his head, still staring at the sky. "I don't know, but whatever happens next, we've just taken the first step." Mila looked at her grandmother, who smiled faintly. "We'll face it together," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. For the first time in days, Mila felt a flicker of hope. They weren't done yet, but they had survived the first battle. And as long as they were together, they had a chance. The days that followed the battle with the Predator's ship were filled with uncertainty. The device, having activated, seemed to have repelled the immediate threat, but the lingering tension in the air was palpable. The aftermath was a quiet that felt like the calm before a storm. Mila, Alex, and her grandmother worked in shifts, monitoring any residual energy signals from the fragments and keeping an eye out for any signs of further attacks. The sky above was an endless canvas, and every night, Mila couldn't help but glance upward, her thoughts heavy with questions. Had the Predator truly been driven off, or was this just the beginning of something far worse? Mila couldn't shake the image of the ship. The shadow of its form, the ripples of its surface, the unfathomable size. It was a creature of darkness, an alien being capable of things they couldn't comprehend. And in her bones, she felt it, a growing certainty that the fight wasn't over. As she sat in her grandmother's living room one evening, working through her father's notes, Alex walked in with his usual somber expression. "I've been trying to track any signs of other ships," he said, sitting down across from Mila. "Nothing's come up so far. It's almost too quiet." Mila didn't respond immediately. She was lost in thought, her eyes lingering on the fragments, now set carefully in a protective case on the table. The machine was complete, but there was still so much they didn't understand. "You're thinking about the Predator, aren't you?" Alex asked, his voice breaking through her thoughts. She nodded slowly. "I can't help it. I don't think it was just a scout. That ship was too advanced, too intentional. It had a mission, Alex. And I think we've only seen a fraction of what's coming." Alex sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Yeah, I was afraid of that too. But how do we prepare for something we don't fully understand? How do we stop it if it comes back stronger?" Mila's eyes flickered to the fragments, her mind racing. "We don't just wait for it to come back. We have to take the fight to them. We need to learn everything we can about their technology, find out where it came from, how it works." Her grandmother's voice interrupted from the doorway. "And if we learn too much?" Mila looked up, surprised at the seriousness in her grandmother's expression. "What do you mean?" "You've seen the way the orbs react to the device," her grandmother continued. "There's a connection there, Mila. A bond. What if we're opening a door to something far worse than the Predator? What if activating that device is like calling in a whole army?" The words hung in the air, chilling and yet somehow logical. Mila wasn't sure what to make of them, but deep down, she knew her grandmother had a point. The more they exposed themselves to the alien technology, the more it seemed to stir something far beyond their control. "I don't have a choice," Mila said quietly. "I can't just ignore it. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about everyone. If the orbs are telling me the truth, then Earth is the next target. We have to act." Her grandmother's gaze softened. "I know, dear, but just be careful. Sometimes, in our attempts to stop something terrible, we end up becoming the very thing we feared." Mila's eyes locked with her grandmother's. "I won't let that happen. We're not going to destroy anything. We're going to save this world. We'll stop the Predator." Her grandmother nodded, though her face remained troubled. "Then let's be ready for whatever comes next." For the next few days, they continued their work on the fragments, using the device to scan for any new energy sources. The results were more promising than expected. There were other signals, other fragments, scattered across the globe. The pieces were far from complete, but the fact that they could locate them meant they were still in the game. However, with every discovery came the haunting reminder of what they had done. The device they had activated was now sending out pulses, signals into the vastness of space, and Mila couldn't ignore the implications. Were they calling for help, or were they awakening something far darker? The quiet continued, but it was a silence that was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. Every glance up at the sky, every rustle of the wind, felt charged with something invisible, something dangerous. And as the next fragment came into range, so did something else, a presence, darker than before, growing nearer. Alex looked up from his equipment, his face pale. "Mila, we've got a problem." She turned, her heart racing as she saw the unmistakable signal on his screen, an energy pulse so powerful it nearly blinded her. "This is it," Mila whispered, her breath catching in her throat. "It's back." Her grandmother's voice cut through the tension. "Then we have no time to waste. Prepare yourselves. We're not running anymore." And for the first time in days, Mila felt a spark of true resolve. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The storm rolled in suddenly, almost as if the sky had been waiting for the signal. Thunder cracked in the distance, and the wind whipped through the barren landscape around them, pulling at their clothes and sending dust swirling in every direction. As the energy pulse on Alex's screen grew more intense, Mila felt the ground beneath her feet tremble slightly, the vibration sending a chill up her spine. The predator was drawing closer, and this time, they were ready for it. Alex grabbed a heavy-duty rifle from the corner of the room, securing it to his back. He was calm, focused, as if the chaos surrounding them had become a second nature. Mila, on the other hand, felt a nervous energy crawling up her legs, making her heart beat faster. But her grandmother's reassuring presence steadied her, as it always had. "We're going to need everything we have," her grandmother said, her voice steady despite the tremor in the air. She turned to Mila. "Are you ready?" Mila nodded, her jaw clenched. "We don't have a choice." They'd spent the last few days analyzing the device, trying to unlock its full potential. They'd learned much, but the more they uncovered, the more terrifying the stakes became. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a beacon, a call to the Predator's ship, drawing it in like a moth to a flame. Mila understood now. Every time the device powered up, it sent signals, and with each pulse, the ship's technology responded, homing in on their location. As the storm grew fiercer, they gathered their gear. Flashlights, food, and supplies were all packed into their bags, ready for whatever came next. But it wasn't the supplies they worried about. It was what they couldn't prepare for, the unknown force that would soon be upon them. The energy pulse continued to grow stronger, and soon it wasn't just on the screen. It was in the air. The very atmosphere hummed with it. Mila could almost feel the device calling to the ship, a silent invitation that reached across the universe. "Let's go," Alex said, his voice sharp with urgency. They stepped out into the storm, the howling wind obscuring their vision. Mila could barely see the road ahead, but they followed the faint glow of the energy pulses from the device. The closer they got, the stronger the pulse became, until it felt like they were standing on the edge of something enormous, something capable of consuming them all. In the distance, a shadow appeared, a dark shape against the swirling storm clouds. Mila's breath caught. It was massive, and it moved with a terrifying precision. The Predator's ship. It was descending. They reached the edge of the small plateau, the last vantage point before the valley stretched into the mountains. The ship hovered just above them, its dark form taking shape in the storm's light. "Get down!" her grandmother yelled, pushing Mila to the ground. Mila barely had time to react, as the ship emitted a low hum that vibrated the very air. She could feel the pressure on her chest, the force of the energy building. Her heart pounded in her ears, and the sky seemed to split open with the intensity of it. Then, the ship released a pulse of its own, a devastating wave of energy that tore through the landscape. The force knocked them back, sending Mila tumbling across the rocky ground. She gasped for air, her body trembling, the air still thick with static. Her vision blurred, but she could see the ship, a hulking mass in the sky, dark and menacing. "We need to move," Alex shouted, pulling her to her feet. Mila looked up, and that's when she saw it. Rising from the wreckage of the shattered landscape was something far more terrifying than she had imagined. A hulking figure, its surface glistening and metallic, was emerging from the ship's underbelly. The Predator was here, its form now fully materialized. It was humanoid but distorted, its limbs far too long, its body unnaturally thin, and its skin a glimmering, translucent sheen. It moved with an eerie fluidity, a creature born of both darkness and light, an alien intelligence far beyond human comprehension. Mila's breath hitched. She'd seen this creature in her visions, but seeing it in person was a different nightmare altogether. "We're too late," she whispered. Her grandmother pulled her away from the scene, her eyes never leaving the approaching creature. "Stay focused, Mila. This is exactly why we came here." Alex raised his rifle, aiming it at the Predator. "We can't let it get any closer. We need to stop it before it reaches the device." Mila nodded, but she knew they were facing an enemy unlike anything they had ever encountered. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the future of the planet itself. The Predator stepped forward, its long, clawed fingers reaching toward the ground. The very earth beneath it seemed to bend and twist, warping under the intensity of its presence. The creature's eyes glowed with a sickly green hue, and as it moved closer, Mila could hear its low, guttural growl vibrating through the ground. "Get to the device," her grandmother ordered. They ran, the storm whipping around them, the predator closing in behind them. They couldn't let it reach the device. They couldn't let it activate again. But as they neared the machine, something stopped them in their tracks. Another figure appeared in front of them. It was a person. Mila's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the figure. It was her father, or at least someone who looked like him. "Dad," she whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. The figure didn't respond, its face obscured by a dark hood. But Mila felt a cold wave of dread wash over her. Something was wrong. This wasn't her father. As the figure stepped forward, a surge of energy erupted from the device. Mila's mind raced. What was happening? Why had it triggered again? The storm intensified, the skies cracking open, and in that moment, Mila realized the truth. They hadn't just activated the device, they had made themselves targets. And now, they were about to face the full force of the predator's wrath. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for the very soul of the planet. And they were running out of time. The figure in front of them moved slowly, deliberately. It stepped out of the shadows with a smooth, almost otherworldly grace. Mila's heart pounded in her chest and her throat tightened. The man, or whatever he was, had her father's features, but there was something unmistakably wrong about him. His eyes, once filled with warmth and care, were now cold, devoid of the familiar spark that had always made her feel safe. "Dad?" she repeated, her voice barely more than a whisper, filled with doubt and fear. The figure didn't respond. Instead, his lips curled into a twisted smile, as if mocking the very idea that she might recognize him. The storm around them intensified, dark clouds swirling like a living entity, mirroring the rising dread in Mila's chest. The energy pulse from the device had triggered something. This was no coincidence. "I know you," Mila said, her voice trembling. "You're not him." The figure tilted his head, his eyes glinting with an unnatural green glow. "Not him? Or perhaps," he said, his voice low and mocking, "perhaps he's just a memory, a part of what you wanted to remember." Mila took a step back, her mind racing. The device, the fragments they had been investigating, they weren't just activating a signal. They were opening a gateway, or worse, a trap. She could feel it now, the weight of the truth settling on her shoulders like a heavy stone. "What have you done to him?" she demanded, her voice rising with the anger and confusion coursing through her. The image of her father, the man who had vanished years ago, haunted her dreams. He had been taken, she had believed, by the alien force. But now, this thing stood before her, using his form to torment her. The figure stepped closer, his presence chilling the air. "What if I told you your father was never taken? What if I told you he chose this? He chose to become one with the entity you fear so much. The predator isn't just an invader. It's a collection of minds, of souls, of consciousnesses. Your father, he wanted to evolve. And now he is part of something far greater than you can comprehend." Mila's chest tightened, a cold knot forming in the pit of her stomach. She couldn't breathe. "No," she gasped, shaking her head. This can't be real. My father would never, wouldn't he?" The figure's smile widened, as if savoring her disbelief. "You see, your father was a visionary. He saw what this world could become with the right guidance, with the right power. And now, with the fragments, with the device, he's on the verge of something incredible. He's already crossed over to a new existence, a new form. And you, Mila, are here to help him complete the transformation." Mila stumbled backward, her legs weak beneath her. She was torn between disbelief and an aching reality. Her father, her flesh and blood, had chosen this path, Had he really been so consumed by his quest for knowledge, for power, that he was willing to forsake everything he had known, everything she had believed about him? Her grandmother stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with sorrow. "It's true, Mila. Your father found something in the fragments. He found a way to transcend, to become more than human. But in doing so, he's lost what made him who he was. What he is now. It's something else entirely." Mila's head spun. She couldn't reconcile the image of her father, the man who had loved her, the man who had fought for their survival, with this being before her. It was too much, too twisted. "No," Mila said, her voice trembling. "You're lying. He wouldn't." The figure raised a hand, and a wave of energy rippled through the air. The device pulsed again, the faint hum turning into a deafening roar. The energy surged, surrounding them like a shield. It was then that Mila realized it wasn't just a weapon. It was an amplifier. It was fueling whatever transformation her father had undergone, pushing him further into whatever existence the predator represented. "You still don't understand, do you?" the figure said, stepping forward with unnatural speed. "The fragments, the device, they're only part of the plan. They're the gateway. And now, thanks to you, I'm close to completing it. Soon, you'll join us, Mila. Soon, you'll be a part of this evolution." "No," she whispered, stepping back, her mind struggling to catch up with the enormity of what was happening. She looked toward Alex and her grandmother. "We have to stop this. We can't let him complete this. We can't fight it, Mila," Alex said, his voice strained as he glanced up at the Predator's ship hovering above them. It was still there, its massive presence casting a shadow over the land, waiting, watching. "We've been playing their game from the start. We have no choice but to face whatever comes next." But Mila wasn't listening. Her eyes were fixed on the figure, her father's twisted reflection, and she couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling that something was terribly, terribly wrong. It wasn't just about stopping the Predator anymore. It was about saving her father from himself, from whatever he had become. The figure raised his hand again, and the storm seemed to respond, swirling around them like a vortex. The energy was suffocating, closing in on Mila. "This is the future, Mila," he said, his voice no longer her father's. It was something darker, colder. "This is the world we were meant to create. You're just a small part of it, a stepping stone." The device hummed louder, the energy building to a crescendo. Mila could feel the ground beneath her shake, the air growing thick with tension. And then, in that moment, she realized there was only one way to stop this, one way to end it. She turned to Alex and her grandmother, her voice firm, full of determination. "We have to destroy the device. Now." Without waiting for their response, Mila grabbed a large rock from the ground, hefting it with all her strength. She hurled it at the device, smashing it into the rocky surface. The ground trembled beneath her feet, the device cracking open with a blinding burst of light. The shockwave sent them sprawling, but Mila didn't stop. She kept her eyes fixed on the figure, on the creature who had once been her father. It wasn't over. Not yet. But it was their last chance. And as the device exploded in a burst of white-hot energy, Mila felt a sudden stillness in the air, as if the world was holding its breath. Mila's world seemed to slow as the device erupted in a brilliant explosion of light and sound. The force of it knocked her to the ground, but she didn't hesitate. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the ringing in her ears, her heart racing in her chest. The figure, the twisted reflection of her father, was now little more than a shadow, fading into the storm. The storm, too, began to quiet, as if the very atmosphere had released a collective sigh of relief. The ship above them flickered, its presence shifting as the connection between it and the device severed. Mila's breath caught in her throat. The storm began to dissipate, the wind dying down, the clouds parting just enough to allow a sliver of moonlight to break through. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the air felt still, like the calm after a great battle. But it wasn't over. "Mila," Alex's voice snapped her back to reality. He and her grandmother were already moving toward her, their faces etched with exhaustion and determination. "Is it done?" Mila asked, breathless, her gaze fixed on the ruins of the device. She could see the faint glow of the remnants flickering in the distance, but there was no sign of the predator, no sign of her father's twisted form. "It's over," her grandmother said, her voice full of relief. "The device is destroyed. The signal is gone. We stopped the ship's control over it." But Mila wasn't entirely convinced. She could feel something lingering, something deep within her, an unease. "What about my father?" The fragments. Her grandmother stepped forward, her expression softening. "Your father chose his path. But the mind he became part of? That's still out there. The predator's influence may have been severed, but the damage, it's not just physical. You might never truly get him back, Mila." Mila closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of the truth settling over her. She had hoped that by stopping the predator, by ending the connection, there would be a way to bring her father home, to restore him to the person he had been. But now, she understood. Some things were beyond saving. Alex rested a hand on her shoulder, offering a quiet support. "We'll keep fighting. For everyone else who's still out there. We know what we're up against now." Mila nodded, the resolve she had felt earlier returning. The fight wasn't over. The device might have been destroyed, but the predators were still out there, lurking in the shadows, watching, waiting. And she wasn't about to let the story end here. "Not like this. I'll keep fighting, too," she said, her voice steady. "But we can't do this alone. We need to learn everything we can. We need to stop them, once and for all." Her grandmother gave her a knowing look. "Then we start anew. There's more to uncover, more to learn. And we'll find a way to keep fighting." Mila turned to look at the horizon. The night was still, but she could sense something out there, an unspoken promise, a call to action. The storm might have passed, but the war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. "I'll never stop," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We'll finish this." Together, the three of them stood there in the silence, looking at the remnants of the device and the predator's ship, now only a dark silhouette against the waning storm clouds. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. They knew the enemy was out there, and they had no choice but to keep pushing forward, no matter the cost. And as the last of the storm clouds cleared, they began to move forward, ready for whatever came next. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more. We'll see you in the next one.